Arabic oud, this beautiful instrument. The reason I'm starting with this one is because historically we know how this was brought to Europe and the chain of events that occurred that led to the guitar tone. So the tuning is C, F, A, D, G, C.
Okay, there's a little bit of that I recognize.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because it's tuned in fourths with one major third. F to A is a major third, everything else is a fourth. That's a guitar, right? The thing that really drove me to be infatuated with this thing is the fact that it has no frets.
Yeah.
The reason that this instrument needs to be fretless is because Arabic music especially uses scales called maqams. Those scales have notes in them that don't exist in the Western scale. They're in between our 12-tone Western system of semitones. Without frets, that means you can get all those spicy in-between notes. Something like
awesome. 1500s.
Yeah, and so now we are into the 1500s in the Renaissance. The same concept, the double stringing
And this
on the
has
lutes.
7 pairs of
This one has 7. Medieval lutes would have had just 4 or 5 pairs. But again, they still played them with pick, and it kind of still sounds more or less like an oud. By the end of the 15th century, you get this, which is usually a 6-course lute. This one has 7, which they added later, and over time they just kept adding basses. More and more and more.
Why was that the norm to have pairs of strings?
One of the reasons, especially in the bass register, is that when you play a gut string, where the string is only this long, the note sounds a bit flubby. It's a little long. By adding an extra octave, high G and a low G, it makes it sound like a louder, more punchy version of that G.
They weren't very bright. Like the steel strings we know, of course, have a very bright sound.
The gut is actually a bit brighter than nylon.
Really?
Yeah, but not as bright as steel. But I think another reason for the double strings is it also gives you a chorus effect. You know, when you have one singer sing versus 2 singers sing, they're never exactly in tune, and it creates a thicker sound. One time, for just an experiment, I took off all the double strings on this lute just to see what it sounded like, and it sounded awful. It just lost all of its resonance. Have you ever heard the term sympathetic resonation?
Yeah.
When you play one note and then stop it, you can actually tell that all the other strings are vibrating, even if they're not touched.
And that adds in like a built-in reverb to the instrument.
Exactly, and the more strings you have, the more sympathetic resonation you get.
And that's a big part of like the sitar, for example. Like it has a ton of strings on it that you don't play. You can, but they're mainly just there to vibrate along with you. And it's like a built-in, like really beautiful reverb.
They always kept the first string single, the chanterelle, which means the singing string, was often single. It allows the melodies to be a little bit more clear.
7 sets of strings.
Correct.
With the top one on its own.
Correct.
And how is this tuned?
It's like a guitar with a capo on the 3rd fret. It would become G to G.
Okay.
If we forget about the 6th course, because the earliest Renaissance lutes, which is what we can call this, didn't have the 7th string. 4ths, 1/3, but the 3rd's in a different place, so we get G,
all right.
C, F, A, D, G. There are some shapes where you can do guitar-like chords, and it works, like D major. That's a D major shape. On this would be a C major chord. The shapes aren't so unfamiliar.
No, but they're just one string up.
Yes.
So this is the first one where just like that, if I picked it up and did my regular guitar thing, here's a C major, it would work.
You could figure it out.
It wouldn't be a C major,
right.
But it would work.
This instrument's heyday was really the 16th century. It existed in the 15th century as well, but the 16th century is really when this instrument was popular. This instrument was played by kings, queens. It was used during Shakespeare plays. It was even played by common people. Eventually, they dropped the pick, but they kept their hand position like this. And the reason they dropped the pick was because in the Renaissance, you have the birth of polyphony. When you have many different parts, which are independent melodies, that occur at the same time and they weave together to create wonderful harmony. But with a pick, remember, you can only really play, one line at a time, and maybe you can strum chords, but you can really only
starting to sound like a guitar.
They figured out that if you drop the pick and use your fingers, you can play several different voices at the same time, because your thumb can play one part and your fingers can play a different part. The most famous piece for the Renaissance lute is probably by this English composer named John Dowland, and he wrote this piece called the Lacrime Pavane, which he later wrote lyrics for with a singer, and it's called Flow My Tears. Polyphony. This is lute-like. It has double strings, friction pegs, gut frets, but now we've lost the teardrop shape. We've got an hourglass, which is reminiscent of a guitar, right? We have a flat back, like a guitar.
That's cool.
Straight headstock, not the bent back headstock anymore. We have made it to our first ever guitar.
All right.
So this is the Renaissance guitar.
Is this when they started using the word guitar as well?
Yeah.
This is 1500s.
Yes.
We have the first guitar.
Correct. And the tuning, my dog has fleas. G, C, E, A. It's a ukulele. That's where the ukulele tuning comes from. G, C, E, A. And the Portuguese in 1550 brought this to Hawaii, and they later turned it into the ukulele.
Right on.
This instrument was really popular for strumming. Much easier to manage chords, as any uke player would know.
We went from very nearly having the guitar's tuning
Right.
to changing it and then coming back to it later.
I think the reason that this one kind of got demoted in terms of the number of strings is because when you have less strings, it's easier to form chords. With only one finger down, I can play a C major chord. Pretty easy. And they thought the same thing. Some people even criticized this instrument as being too simple to play chords, but it's great for chords. Very easy to strum, very easy to play songs and then self-accompany. You could sing over that very easily. But they kept the chanterelle, they kept the double stringing, and they also developed a small solo repertoire for it. And there's a lot of beautiful pieces, especially from France. Between about 1600 to 1750, the Baroque period. Now we've added a fifth course, and the whole thing is tuned a fourth lower. So we have E, B, G, D, A.
Yeah.
Sounds like a guitar.
Getting pretty close.
We just don't have a low E. We still have doubled strings. We still have the single chanterelle, but we've kept the flat headstock. We've gained a mustache bridge, which I love so much. Remember, this beautiful rose is now a three-dimensional decoration, which is made of goat skin.
Now, that was very common at the time?
Yeah, all different designs you can see by different makers.
So it's like a branding thing.
I think that's the idea. It's purely aesthetic, by the way. This doesn't do anything for the sound. Right? So we also have a flat back, gut frets, friction pegs. All that's kind of the same. I did something on purpose in this video. I took out the peg.
Yeah, people were asking in the last one.
The 10th peg, which is actually would have been a doubled version of the E, but since most of the time they use it as a chanterelle without the doubled string, it actually has 9 strings, and now there's no confusion. The appeal for the Baroque guitar was all the incredible sophisticated strum patterns that they developed, but also could do plucking. Punteado means plucking, raschiato means strumming. The punteado sounds something like. and the raschiato. At the beginning of the 1800s, we basically get a new instrument.
Now,
we have a 6 single string guitar tuned E, A, D, G, B, E.
And we made it. Yeah. So what year is this?
Around 1800, we start seeing these 6 single string guitars, but they're a little bit smaller than our current guitars, right? It kind of looks like a Baroque guitar,
but we're there.
But
E to E, 6 strings, single strings.
Totally. Let's see what's different in the Baroque guitar first. Of course, now we have a low E. The double stringing, as I mentioned, was often to give the sound a bit of a louder sound, as well as in the bass to clarify those low bass notes, which with gut is a little bit dull sounding. So with an upper octave, you get more
now
clear.
we're on to different strings.
Yes, I think around 1750, this guy in Naples, Savarese, invented the wound string. So he wounded metal around gut or sometimes silk, and when you do that, you get a really punchy, loud bass sound. They abandoned the double string because they didn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And then they abandoned all the doubles, and now you get 6 single strings, which is easier to tune, and it's easier to do things like slurs and things on. In general, it's more convenient. It's cheaper because you have less strings. For the early 19th century, it was the new trend.
Yeah. In 1750, we now have wound strings.
Yes.
Which is a huge change to the sound.
Yes. Since we have metal wound strings, remember those gut frets that I told you? No one was looking to replace them. Oh no, the metal wound strings keep ruining by chewing up all the gut frets. They experimented with many different materials, wood, and it ended up being metal that was
That made
preferred.
more sense. I guess since the metal wound strings.
But there's a problem. If they're metal, you can't move them. So now we have to decide, okay, how are we going to temper them? And equal temperament was the decision because you can play in every key and everything will sound pretty good. We have a smooth neck now. On these other instruments, they only had like 8 or so frets. This thing has 22 frets. It's a total shredder guitar.
And they're on the fretboard, they're not on the body anymore.
Exactly right. The fretboard itself extends above the neck, and actually that's floating. I don't know if you can see, that's not touching the soundboard.
Oh, just like a cello or...
Yes, you mentioned that these early guitars didn't have truss rods, which is right.
Yeah.
So you can't make adjustments on the fly. Guess what?
Does this have a truss rod in it?
It's not a truss rod. There's a mechanism here. It comes with a clock key. You can put the clock key in and turn this, and it changes the angle of the neck.
Oh, that's one way around it.
Yes. So mid-concert, if you're a little buzzy, you can go, right? And then you have a different action. This wasn't on every single 19th century guitar. This guitar specifically is a replica of a guitar from a very famous Viennese maker named Stauffer. In places like Vienna, it was intense. They called it guitar mania. This just was the new thing. Hear how this thing sounds, this little guitar.
The music of the time. now we're on a classical guitar.
This is our classical guitar.
Yep.
Every classical guitar you see, if you meet someone who says, I play classical guitar, their guitar is
this.
going to look more or less exactly like this. And Torres was responsible for codifying these dimensions. We have a big body, and it's a bit deeper,
Yeah.
right? It produces more sound. It's bassier. We still have, of course, the metal frets. And here now, finally, are our gears.
Finally, correct gears.
We can fine tune on such a small scale. I don't
So
have
now
to
it's
worry
no-
about pegs slipping or anything like
Yeah.
that. What we hear now is a bit more volume. This guitar, the same dimensions, is also what flamencos use. They usually have clear plate because they hit the top of the guitar so much that they don't want to damage the wood. So all of that really fun. All that stuff works so well on this instrument too, and I hope you can hear this is a louder sound.